I'd cheat on my future wife with one thing. Books. No, seriously, I love reading so much I've probably flicked through more pages than Kim Kardashian has flicked her bean. Without books, I don't know where I'd be today. I wouldn't know half the things I know, and I definitely wouldn't have this moustache.
How does
I've been reading heavily since I was 17 years old, but it wasn't until I was 20 years old and I moved to Poland that I realised how outgunned we are in the West compared to our fellow Eastern European chums in terms of reading. Most of my Polish friends had read literary classics like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky and War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy by the ages of 14, and not only read them, but they had to actively dissect the psychological meanings in the books. What did you read when you went to school, Lewis? Final Fantasy and Of Mice and Men? Oh, you weren't reading classics like 1984, Island by Aldous Huxley, or Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings? Who? With the decrease in popularity of modern universities and the access we all share to brain-zapping technology, the future belongs to those who can plonk their arse down and sit and dissect the utmost insights from a book. As Naval Ravikant says, it's no longer educated versus uneducated, it's likes to read versus doesn't like to read. I read about 2 hours every day. Oh, look at me. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to record half of the videos I do. So, as requested by some of you, my fellow muchachos, in the next few minutes I'm going to share with you the reading process I've perfected over the last 7 years of my life so we can gain maximal insights from books. If you're not sold on the benefits of reading just yet, or you're a half-assed reader, give me a minute and let me see if I can't change your mind. Okay, boom, minute, let's go. You might ask, what's the point in reading when I can read a podcast or an article? I'll tell you why. Let's outline the energy investment required from the author who writes the article, magazine, records the podcast, or writes the book. Your average article probably takes the author about 3 days to write. Perhaps a bit of research is required in terms of reading and, of course, editing for the article. A magazine is like many articles slapped together, and to be honest, no one reads magazines these days, so your average magazine probably takes the author about a month or so to write. A podcast, if it's Andrew... might need longer than a minute. Podcast, if it's Andrew Huberman styley, where he's researching the material before he records the podcast, probably takes about a week to do. And of course, if it's a podcast where people are having a conversation, no prep required, just bang, ramble. A book, however, can take anywhere between 6 months and 20 years to write. So the exchange in value you're getting from a book is second to none, as you're literally getting years of that person's life, learning from their mistakes and all of the crucial ideas and thoughts that they've meditated on. Convinced you to read more yet? Well, regardless, let's get into the juicy details. First of all, I'm going to share you my one life-changing reading tip which will rock your world. If a book is shit, stop reading it. Yep, that's right. You don't have to read bad books. If the book is chatting pure wass within the first 10%... Oh, no, Marcus Aurelius. If the book is chatting pure waffle within the first 10%, get rid of it. I do this unless someone has told me that the book is a slow burner and it takes some time to get into. For example, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Also, be wary of reading the most popular books that everyone else has read. I had a friend, Agnieszka, who only read Pulitzer Prize winning books. And fair enough, she would have read some great works, but she probably would have just thought what everyone else was thinking. If you want to arrive at unique conclusions and different perspectives, you must get used to reading books no one knows about. For example, this book, so straight up bussing, the front cover has come off. I found this in a charity shop for 50p, and it's been the best book I've ever read on social skills. Another one? For all my Indian muchachos out there, you'll know this one. Usually when it comes to Hinduism, people just read the Bhagavad Gita, but no, you can take it a step further and read something a bit more obscure like the Upanishads. To find books, I use Kindle recommendations or Amazon. But to find the best books, what I would recommend is think about the people online, your favourite influencers or academics who you admire. Then purge their reading lists, if they have one, and read the books which stick out to you. I did this with Jordan Peterson, Chris Williamson and Ryan Holiday. When it comes to buying digital versus paperback books, I have one rule. If I'm unsure if I like the book, I buy it digitally. This is because I can easily return it through Amazon if it is crap and, minimalism and all that. If I know I'll like the book, I buy it paperback. So I can return to certain chapters, keep it as a collectible, and ultimately just demolish it with my notes. Speaking of which, when it comes to taking notes when reading, my process is quite simple. As I'm reading a paperback, I keep a pencil close, and if I notice anything worthwhile remembering or that I want to refer to, I underline it, fold the page and make a note of the page number at the beginning of the book and give a title to the note. This way I can create actionable notes and chapters I can skip to when I return to reading the book. So for example, if we look at a book like Letters from a Stoic for Seneca, all of the letters are in Roman numbers, which don't really give things titles. So when I read the book for the first time, I went through, gleaned the main topic of the letter, and I've put it at the beginning of the book. So whenever I pick it up of an evening, I just skip to whatever letter I want. But if you want to take things a step further and become a memorizing beast of a person, using your phone or notebook, whenever you come across an interesting fact or insight when you're reading, write down an active recall question for you to answer later when you've stopped reading. I do this when I'm listening to Andrew Huberman style podcasts, and bloody hell does it work wonders. This is because you're actively challenging your mind to remember what you learned, but within a context of a question. As a quick side note, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the difference between memorizing and understanding. When I was 21, I memorised everything. I was a walking quote spouting machine for everything I learned, but a lot of which I didn't understand. It honestly hasn't been until at least 3 months ago that everything that I've been learning for the last 5 years has sunk into a fundamental level of understanding, where I'm not just regurgitating what this psychologist said or this neuroscientist said, what this brain region does. I actually feel I'm understanding what I'm talking about. We're going to get into actually how to become an expert in something and utilise reading for this benefit, but it's interesting when you first start learning something, you want to spread your roots as far and wide as possible, and then over the years it all sinks into a fundamental level of understanding. You can tell if you understand something by if you're able to actually answer nuanced questions from the person you're trying to explain this thing to, instead of just regurgitating facts, and then when someone asks you a comprehension question on what you're talking about, you're not just like, protocols for understanding what you're reading are: summarize each book after you've read it in your own words, but most importantly, put your ideas into a platform such as Obsidian, where you can build your own Zettelkasten, which is essentially a conglomerate of all of your ideas. This has been brilliant for me in terms of capturing all the ideas I note down from podcasts and books I read and everything that I'm learning about, because they all have relevance because I can link them all together with topics. I'm not going to give you a full guide on Obsidian. I'm going to put a link in the description from another YouTuber who I would recommend for you to watch. I don't know his full name, but he did a really good guide. With some books, I'll take notes on my phone as I'm reading it, or I'll start creating visual frameworks as I'm either listening to a podcast or reading the book. This can be a really long process, but it's so much more worth it because, again, you're sinking the knowledge into a level of understanding where it then becomes wisdom and you can practically explain it to other people and understand it yourself. Lastly, if you want to get the most out of a book when you read it, just taking notes isn't enough. Here's a template you can use, which will also be in the description of this video, in order to summarize what you've read and turn it into a mini essay. This way you can consolidate your learning into your own words, because you want to work with your memory, which forms based on 4 things: repetition, association, novelty, and emotional resonance. So now let's get into the juicy details of how you can become an expert in any field by utilizing the power of books. I'm going to make an arse out of you and I by assuming you read because you want to learn stuff and become more of an authority in what you're learning about. So here are 5 not so easy ways you can become an expert on any topic, as recommended by renowned journalist and writer Steven Kotler. 1. The 5 books of stupid. After you've first highlighted what field you want to learn more about or become an expert in, then allow yourself to pick 5 books worth of stupid. That is, 5 books on the subject that you will read and not judge anything about what you're learning. But not just any 5 books. There's a method to the madness. Let's imagine you want to learn about relationship dynamics between men and women. Okay, so book 1 is the most popular or best-selling book you can find on the topic. The goal here is fun. For example, The Way of the Superior Man. Book 2, also a popular book but a little bit more technical and specific. Again, the goal is fun and excitement. For example, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Book 3, the first semi-technical book on the topic. Still interesting, but not necessarily a page-turner. This book will lay down the expert terminology of the first 2 books. For example, Attached. Book 4, We've Arrived. This is the first hard book. Not as fun as the first 3, but this book will give you an idea of what the experts in the field are thinking about. Search for the boundaries in the field. What is considered crazy? Where do the lines of inquiry begin and end? Book 4 is usually the hardest to read. For example, Relationship Dynamics by Victor or Furhi. Book 5. This isn't the hardest to read, but it's the hardest to comprehend. This book needs to be about the future of the topic, where the field is heading, giving you a feel for the cutting edge. For example, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. The key with reading these books is not to make yourself feel smart, but to make yourself feel very stupid. There will be new words and concepts you've never heard before, and if you were judging your learning, this would make you feel even more stupid. But remember, the key with reading these 5 books is not to judge anything you're learning. In fact, any frustration you feel while you're reading these first 5 books is the presence of a neurochemical called norepinephrine in your brain, which primes the brain for learning. So your frustration is a sign that you're doing the right thing. Don't be like me when I was 9 years old trying to learn maths with my brother getting annoyed and throwing every pencil that came my way on the floor. The key with these first 5 books is to learn the terminology we don't know. And in the first 3 books, remember, you won't understand a thing. But that's okay. Don't go back and reread, just go on to the next book. Oh, what, downstairs? Bloody hell. Speaking of books. Divinely timed. Where were we? The reason why you just want to go on to the next books is because a lot of learning happens as we engage something called unconscious pattern recognition, as you start to see the link between many different fields. Then, as you are reading, take notes on 3 particular things: the history of the narrative, the terminology that keeps popping up, and what gets you excited. After these 5 books, your brain will start to feel as if you have enough meaningful and articulate questions about the topic of the field. And as you're reading these books, make sure you're writing down questions that you want answered. Before we move on to part 2, note that this process is about acquiring knowledge, not skills. In order to acquire skills, you need hands-on work, not reading. Seeing as these books interrupted our video, to give a little bit of suspense, I'll reveal what they are at the end of the video. Number 2, be the idiot. Now hopefully you've got a notepad full of questions, hopefully some of which have been answered with your reading, but the unanswered ones are where we're going to focus our attention next. Now it's time to seek out the experts to answer these questions. This might be a bit of a tricky process and one you don't actually want to do, but this is a bit more of an advanced one. Actually reach out to experts in the field so you can have a conversation with them. Or as an alternative to getting face-to-face time with an expert, what I'd suggest is find a podcaster who's also interested in the field you're studying and listen to all of the podcasts where they interview experts. For example, one of the fields I'm interested in is evolutionary psychology, which I also know our boy Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom is also interested in that as well. Now, he's not studied it academically, but he gets a lot of evolutionary psychologists on his podcasts, and he asks the exact same questions I would want to ask them as well. So he's a great way for me to game the system of actually interviewing these experts myself. However, if you do get the opportunity to interview experts, then just know you need to build good rapport with them and ask genuine questions, because most people will love to talk about their field. Interviewing is a skill. You have to make the other person feel comfortable whilst respecting their time. Don't waffle on about yourself or your investigation at the beginning of the conversation. Have a list of questions prepared before you meet them and only assume you'll get 30 minutes of their time. And never ask someone something you could look up on the internet. Make sure your first few questions show personal knowledge about this person you're interviewing and general knowledge about their subject. For example, don't ask, "What do you think about the debate between discipline and motivation?" Ask, "In that article you wrote about the interplay between discipline and motivation, you mentioned a spiritual approach. When did you start thinking about the problem in this way?" Write down notes as you're listening, and how can you tell when you've spoken to enough experts? When the experts start telling you you're asking good and articulate questions, that's when you're on the right track. Number 3, explore the gaps. Most people specialise in one field and they pigeonhole themselves into it. Your goal here is to recognise what the author Stephen Johnson called the slow hunch. This is where you note the field you're studying is linked in some way to another field you've studied in the past. Consider how the current field you're studying might fit into this other field but within a fresh context. Note here, if you're a student, this won't help you pass an exam where someone else is dictating the learning for you, but this will help with your fluid intelligence as you synthesize different topics and fields, because most knowledge tends to get balkanized where it's divided into small hostile groups. Your job is to fluidly float between the gaps in the knowledge, synthesizing all of the fields. Number 4, always ask the next question. There's a principle in reporting or journalism which states 3 sources make a fact. If 3 people tell you the same thing happened, you can probably believe it's true. But sometimes what happens is you ask a 5th person and that fact gets denied. So at this point in your knowledge gathering process, you want to seek out the people who disagree with each other. You must frequently move into the realm where everything you previously thought is wrong, which in order to do so, you'll have to leave your ego at the door. As you start to develop your own opinions amongst all of these disagreements, you want to be able to say something along the lines of, experts tend to disagree about this point, but my own feeling is, as an intellectual rule of thumb, if your opinion hasn't been refuted at least once on a topic, you've got some more work to do. Finally, number 5, find the narrative. Our brain is a survival mechanism which is always trying to link cause and effect, because if we do, we can predict the future. And this is why our brain loves narrative and stories. When our brain tracks a narrative in a certain field, we get a little squirt of dopamine for our discovery. So once you start to grasp the narrative of the field, the history of it, and how it's evolved over the years, to really consolidate your learning into long-term memory, your goal is to tell at least 2 people the narrative as best you can. Person 1 will probably be a hostile audience member, usually a family member or a stranger who couldn't give a toss about the topic, but will listen to you, usually out of pity. But if you can summarise the narrative to this hostile audience member in a way that they find interesting and engaging, you're on the right path. Person 2 could be an expert, preferably an expert who isn't afraid to tell you when you've got everything completely tits up, otherwise known as wrong. If you can satisfy both audiences, you'll have enough squirts of dopamine to consolidate your learning into long-term memory. You'll also feel as if you've earned your way to your opinions, which will give you confidence to talk about them in public. The reason for the confidence? Neurobiology. When we take things public, we release dopamine for the risk-taking, norepinephrine for the excitement, cortisol for the stress of potentially getting it wrong, and serotonin and oxytocin for the social interaction. As we bring this to a close, it's important to note that the biggest obstacles to becoming an expert with this process is 1. Finishing the 5 books. It's a great foundation, but not enough for you to test your skills. For example, in martial arts, the early belts are the most dangerous levels, as these belts think they're good enough to fight higher belts, but they always get their arse beat. Number 2, the awareness of your ignorance. As you continue this process, you'll become increasingly aware of all the things you don't know. Expect this. Experts usually feel dumber than novices. Instead, use this to your advantage, highlighting the gaps in your knowledge, guiding you to reading the next 5 books, then the next, then the next, then the next. There we go. Want to see what books arrived? Also, where to get books as well. I buy them through Amazon if I want to get them brand new, but eBay is absolutely brilliant because you can get a lot of books which are very cheap and used. So we have Cognitive Neuroscience textbook, that's just come. The Biology of the Mind. Nice. I read textbooks when I want to delve really deep into a topic, like I'm doing with neuroscience at the moment. Number 2, A Day in the Life of the Brain. So I've ordered a lot of books on brain health. The Neuroscience of Consciousness from Dawn Till Dusk. The Upward Spiral. Using neuroscience to reverse the course of depression, one small change at a time. Brain Food. How to eat smart and sharpen your mind. The neuroscience behind the food that will improve your mental fitness. Bloody hell. Neuroscience. Exploring the brain. Bloody hell, mate. Oh, mate, seeing those diagrams of neurons and the neocortex just makes me moist. Right, any other tips that I would mention as we close this off? What I would say is don't worry about flicking between books. Just like Naval Ravikant, I probably have 10 to 12 books I'm reading on the go at any moment in time. The books I read before bed are more spiritual in the evening, so that would be the Bible, stuff about Hinduism, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, the way of the superior man perhaps, but throughout the day, when I'm more switched on, that's when I'll read heavier material such as about social skills, neuroscience, and the like. Audiobooks? No, definitely not. Oh, bonus tip, if you really want to improve your articulation and how you speak, read books out loud. I really recommend it. One of my mates has done this. He was doing it as he was learning Italian. I do it when I'm speaking Spanish sometimes, because I have El Camino del Hombre Superior, I have The Way of the Superior Man in Spanish, and La Quietud es la clave, so stillness is the key. And it's really good. If you're learning the language, I really recommend that, reading things out loud. I was an English tutor for foreigners for about 3 years, bless you. The students who learned the language the quickest were the people who read out loud quite frequently, because it gives you a really good rhythm of the language as well, also in your native language. So really recommend that. If I missed anything, let me know. Otherwise, stay disciplined, playful, and un poco peligroso. Adiós, muchachos.